Google Stadia was supposed to make the game console disappear. In 2019, Google promised you could click a button and play blockbuster games instantly on a television, laptop, tablet, or phone, with the real hardware running inside its data centers. No downloads, no expensive box, no waiting. For a moment, it sounded inevitable. Then, less than 3 years later, Google shut it down. The question is why. At the Game Developers Conference in 2019, Google framed Stadia as the moment gaming caught up with the rest of the internet. Music had moved to streaming, movies had moved to streaming. Google wanted games to become something you launched as easily as a video. The pitch leaned on Google's biggest strengths. Stadia would run through Chrome, appear on Android devices, connect to televisions through Chromecast, and sit beside YouTube, where millions of people were already watching games every day. In Google's version of the future, a player could watch a trailer, click a button, and enter the game within seconds. That idea mattered because cloud gaming had always sounded fragile. Latency, image quality, and internet reliability could ruin the experience instantly. Google argued it had the infrastructure to solve that. Its global data centers, networking experience, and bandwidth expertise gave Stadia a credibility most gaming companies could not match. For developers, Google promised powerful remote hardware and fewer platform barriers. For players, it promised access without installations, patches, storage limits, or a console under the television. On paper, this was not a small experiment. It was Google trying to turn gaming into a service as ordinary as opening a browser. So why did something this convenient still need more than technical muscle to survive? Then came the part that made the simple promise harder to understand: the price. Stadia launched in November 2019, but not as a fully open service. Early access came through the Founders Edition, a paid bundle that included a controller, a Chromecast Ultra, and 3 months of Stadia Pro. The broader free tier, the version that sounded closest to just click and play, would not arrive until later. Stadia Pro also created confusion about what people were paying for. It was not a full Netflix-style library of games. The subscription gave players features like up to 4K resolution, better audio, and a rotating selection of claimable games. But many major titles still had to be purchased separately, often at full price. That put Stadia in an awkward middle ground. A console asks for a large upfront payment, but you own the hardware and understand the trade-off. A subscription service asks for a monthly fee, but usually promises a deep catalog in return. Stadia asked some players to buy into the platform, pay for premium streaming features, and still purchase individual games. For a new product, that mattered. Google was selling a future where the console disappeared, but the bill did not feel simpler, and even if someone accepted the pricing, they still needed a strong reason to choose Stadia immediately instead of waiting. When Stadia finally reached players, the future looked smaller than the pitch. The launch lineup had a few recognizable names, including Destiny 2, Assassin's Creed Odyssey, Mortal Kombat 11, and Red Dead Redemption 2. But it was thin for a brand new platform, and many of those games were already available on consoles or personal computers. Stadia was not only asking people to try streaming, it was asking them to buy games again, inside an ecosystem with no proven long-term history. The technology could be impressive under the right conditions. With strong internet, low network congestion, and the right display setup, Stadia could feel surprisingly close to a local console. But that was not the same as being reliable for everyone. Some players noticed input delay, others saw compression in darker scenes or fast motion. Data caps turned long play sessions into a monthly calculation instead of a simple habit. Then there were the missing pieces. Features shown or implied during the reveal, like seamless YouTube integration, state share, and broad device freedom, were limited or absent at launch. The service worked, but it did not feel complete. For many early users, Stadia felt less like the arrival of a revolution and more like a paid beta with a Google logo on it. That exposed the deeper problem. Stadia needed players to trust it before they rebuilt their gaming lives around it. At launch, Google had not earned that trust yet. Stadia's biggest risk was not lag. It was the question every buyer eventually had to ask: what exactly am I buying? On a console, a digital purchase still feels attached to a machine you control. On Stadia, the game lived entirely on Google's servers. You paid full price for access, but the hardware, the storefront, and the future of the library were all in Google's hands. If Stadia ever shut down, players wondered whether their purchases would become memories with receipts. That fear did not appear from nowhere. Google already had a public graveyard of abandoned products, from Google Plus to Inbox to Hangouts, and many smaller experiments. Some were useful, some had loyal communities. Many disappeared once they no longer fit Google's strategy. For a free messaging app, that was annoying. For a library of $60 games, it felt dangerous. So Stadia's promise started working against it. Play anywhere sounded freeing, but only if people believed the place they were playing from would still exist years later. Instead of imagining a future without downloads and console boxes, customers imagined a shutdown notice. Google eventually did refund Stadia hardware and software purchases after announcing the service would close, which was unusually generous. But by then, the trust problem had already shaped the platform's life. When players hesitate to buy in, publishers hesitate to invest. And without a growing audience or a deep catalog, Stadia's next problem became unavoidable. Developers saw the same problem from the other side. A Stadia port was not free. Studios had to assign engineers, test streaming-specific features, support another storefront, and hope enough people were there to make the work pay off. For big publishers, that meant Stadia needed a confident audience. For smaller teams, it meant taking a risk on a platform that still had not proved it could sell games at scale. That made exclusives even more important. Google needed games that gave players a reason to choose Stadia first, not as a bonus place to play something already available elsewhere. To solve that, Google created Stadia Games and Entertainment, with studio efforts in Montreal and Los Angeles, and brought in Jade Raymond, a well-known producer from the Assassin's Creed and Electronic Arts world, to lead the push. Then, in 2021, Google shut it down. The internal Stadia studios were closed before they had delivered the kind of first-party lineup that could define the platform. Jade Raymond left the company. Developers who had joined to build cloud-native games suddenly watched Google step away from making its own. The message to the rest of the industry was brutal. If Google would not fund exclusive games for Stadia, why should outside studios bet big on it? From that point on, Stadia stopped looking like the future of gaming and started looking like a product waiting for a decision. In September 2022, Google finally made the decision public. Stadia had not gained the user traction the company expected, and the service would be shut down. The end date was set for January 2023. After just over 3 years, Google's big attempt to turn game streaming into a mainstream platform was closing its doors. Then Google did something unusual. It announced refunds for Stadia Store game purchases, add-ons, in-game currency, and hardware bought through the Google Store, including controllers and bundles. Most Stadia Pro subscription payments were not refunded, but the broader refund program was still larger than many players expected. That choice softened the landing. People who had spent money building a Stadia library were not simply left with nothing, but it also exposed the central fear that had followed Stadia from the beginning. If your games exist only because a company keeps the servers alive, then ownership depends on a business decision. Xbox Cloud Gaming kept growing because it was tied to Game Pass, Xbox accounts, and a library people were already using. GeForce Now survived by leaning on personal computer storefronts like Steam and Epic Games, letting players stream many games they already owned. Stadia asked for something harder. Buy into a new store, trust a new platform, and believe Google would support it long enough for that library to matter. The streaming tech often worked better than skeptics expected, but the business model carried the bigger risk. Stadia was not exactly wrong, and it was not simply early. It was a glimpse of the future sold without enough reasons to believe it would last. Stadia failed because the offer required more trust than Google had earned. Players feared losing access, doubted Google's long-term commitment, saw weak launch momentum, and then watched first-party studios disappear. The technology was not the deal-breaker. The deal was. Thanks for watching. Would you trust another Google gaming platform? Write your answer in the comments.